The Starborn Fury was never meant to see real combat. It was a prototype, an experimental warship built in secrecy by Earth's finest engineers, a project deemed too ambitious, too reckless. Humanity was still licking its wounds from its first encounter with the Zalari Dominion, an empire that spanned half the known galaxy. When Earth's colonies were ravaged in a ruthless show of force, the bureaucrats and politicians chose diplomacy. But in the shadows, a few visionaries prepared for the inevitable. Commander Rourke knew the truth. He had seen what the Zalari did to conquered worlds, how they razed cities, enslaved survivors, and laughed at humanity's weakness. The Treaty of Submission was a death sentence in slow motion. That was why the Starborn Fury existed. The ship was unlike anything humanity had ever built. Armed with an experimental warp-core reactor that could fold space rather than travel through it, it could outmaneuver anything in existence. Its weapons array was theoretical, built from stolen alien technology, and modified with human ingenuity. The Aegis shielding system, designed to bend enemy energy fire around the hull, had never been tested outside of simulations. It wasn't a warship. It was a desperate gamble. And tonight it was leaving the Sol system, whether Earth's leaders approved or not. Rourke stood on the bridge, his jaw clenched as the sleek metal hull of Mars's shipyards gleamed beneath them. His crew was small but hand-picked, soldiers, engineers, and outcasts who had lost everything to the Zalari. None of them had permission to be here. "Final checks complete," Lieutenant Diaz announced. "All systems green, but the Navy's onto us. We've got 2 cruisers inbound." "Then we don't have much time," Rourke muttered. The shipyard's docking clamps were still engaged, its automated systems refusing to release the Fury. The Martian authorities weren't willing to let their greatest creation be stolen. "Valka, override it," Rourke ordered. The Fury's chief engineer, a gaunt woman with cybernetic implants, was already deep in the system. "Working on it," she murmured. "Security's tight. This wasn't meant to launch without a proper command code." "Then I'll make it simple." Rourke turned to his weapons officer. "Hail Mars Control. Tell them if they don't release the clamps, I'll blow this dockyard into space dust." Silence filled the bridge for a long, tense moment. Then, with a loud clang, the ship was free. "That worked." Diaz blinked. "Of course not," Valka scoffed. "I hacked it first." Rourke grinned. "Then let's get the hell out of here." The Starborn Fury ignited its engines, bursting from Mars orbit like a comet. The pursuing Earth cruisers hesitated. They weren't about to fire on their own experimental warship. By the time they decided to act, the Fury was already gone. Its destination? The war front? Its mission? To show the Zalari that humanity wasn't done fighting. And before this was over, the galaxy would never be the same again. The Starborn Fury tore through the void at impossible speed, its experimental drive bending space around it rather than pushing through like conventional engines. The transition was smoother than any human vessel had ever experienced. No violent shaking, no disorienting inertia. It was like gliding through reality itself. On the bridge, Rourke watched the swirling blue vortex of the warp tunnel ahead. The Zalari front lines were still 3 days away by standard warp travel, but with the Fury's new drive, they would be there in less than 1. "Status?" he asked, turning toward Valka. The engineer's fingers danced across her holo console. "Systems are stable. The reactor's running at 87% efficiency. Shields are holding, and our weapons array is primed. No anomalies so far." "That's good," Rourke muttered. "Too good." Diaz, the ship's tactical officer, smirked. "You're really going to complain that the ship actually works?" Rourke shook his head. "I've been in this game too long. When things go smoothly, it just means something worse is around the corner." He turned his attention to the star map. Their destination was Dallas 9, a human colony that had gone silent 2 weeks ago. The Zalari claimed it was a peaceful annexation, that the colonists had surrendered willingly. But the last transmission from the planet was a distress call, a garbled message of screams and weapons fire. Rourke clenched his jaw. He knew exactly what the Zalari had done. "We're coming out of warp in 60 seconds. Valka reported. "All hands, battle stations." Rourke commanded. The bridge darkened as the Fury's alert systems activated. Holographic readouts hovered in the air, showing weapons charge levels, shield integrity, and external sensor feeds. The crew moved with the efficiency of people who had nothing left to lose. The warp tunnel collapsed around them, and the ship snapped back into real space with a soft hum. What they saw made Rourke's blood run cold. Dallas 9 was burning. The once thriving colony had been reduced to smoldering ruins. Fires raged across the surface, lighting up the night side of the planet like dying embers. Debris from destroyed human ships drifted in orbit, the wreckage silent proof of a battle Earth had never been told about. And above the ruins loomed the enemy fleet. A dozen Zalari warships floated like metal leviathans in the dark, their obsidian hulls reflecting the burning world below. They hadn't even bothered to leave. This was a message. The Dominion didn't conquer, it eradicated. Diaz cursed under his breath. "Those bastards!" Valka's hands tightened into fists. "They're still here. We can't let this stand." Rourke took a deep breath, suppressing the rage boiling inside him. "Think. Don't just react. We don't have the firepower to take them all head on," he said. "But we didn't come here for a fair fight." He turned toward his pilot, a young man named Keller. "How close can you get us without them detecting us?" Keller grinned. "With this drive, I can put us in their damn shadow." Rourke nodded. "Then do it." The Starborn Fury vanished into the black, its prototype cloaking system activating for the first time in real combat. The ship became a ghost, slipping through the void unseen. They were outnumbered, outgunned, but the Zalari had made one mistake. They thought humanity had already lost. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. The Starborn Fury glided through the wreckage of Dallas 9's defense fleet like a predator stalking its prey. Fires burned inside the shattered remains of human battleships, their crews long dead, their sacrifices ignored by the bureaucrats back on Earth. But Rourke and his crew would not ignore them. "They don't see us," Valka whispered, eyes scanning the sensor readouts. "Cloaking field is holding. We're a ghost to them." Diaz exhaled. "Good, because if even one of those bastards looks our way, we're dead." He wasn't exaggerating. The Zalari warships outnumbered them 12-1, each vessel bristling with energy cannons, powerful enough to turn the Fury into dust. The Dominion had sent a full occupation force, cruisers, destroyers, even a massive command ship looming at the center of the formation like a floating monolith of death. Rourke studied the enemy fleet, his mind working through options. A direct assault was suicide. But if they could strike from the shadows, inflict real damage, they could shift the balance. "We need intel first," he said. "Keller, bring us in closer to that command ship. I want to know what the hell they're still doing here." The Fury weaved through the debris field, silent and unseen. As they neared the Zalari flagship, the ship's scanners began pulling in data, transmissions, power signatures, heat readings. The Zalari were using planetary relays to communicate with their forces deeper in the system, and their defenses were running on automated cycles. "They're not expecting trouble," Valka said. "Their shields are in low power mode, and they're piggybacking communications through the colony's old satellite network." "Sloppy." Rourke smirked. "Overconfidence will kill them." Diaz pointed at a flashing red marker on the holo display. "I've got a heat signature inside the flagship. Lower decks. It's not Zalari." Rourke's eyes narrowed. Survivors. Valka ran a deeper scan. Human life signs. Weak, but alive. They're keeping prisoners. That changed everything. His fingers curled into a fist. The Dominion never took prisoners unless they had a reason. Were they scientists, military officers, resistance leaders? Whatever the Zalari wanted from them, it couldn't be good. "We can't leave them there," Rourke said. Diaz turned toward him, his expression grim. "You know what that means, right? We're not just hitting and running anymore. A rescue means direct contact." "I know." Rourke locked eyes with his crew. This ship wasn't built to run away. It was built to change the war. Silence fell over the bridge. Then Keller cracked his knuckles. "Well, I always wanted to see what this thing could really do." Valka smirked. "Let's make history." Rourke nodded. "Prepare for infiltration." The Starborn Fury banked hard, slipping underneath the Zalari flagship's blind spot. The cloaking field held as they maneuvered towards the underside of the massive warship. This wasn't just a rescue mission anymore. By the time they were done, the Zalari would know what fear felt like. The Starborn Fury hovered just beneath the Zalari flagship, its cloaking field masking it from enemy sensors. The crew worked in hushed intensity, each movement precise, each breath measured. They were outnumbered and outgunned, but they had one advantage. The Zalari had no idea they were here. Rourke studied the enemy vessel's schematics on the holo display. Valka had managed to hack into its external security feeds, giving them a glimpse inside. The prisoners were being held in the lower decks, near the engine core, deep inside enemy territory. "They're in a secured containment block," Valka reported. "Looks like around 20 people, mostly civilians, but I'm seeing military personnel mixed in, probably officers from Dallas 9's defense force." Rourke's jaw tightened. Those officers were supposed to be dead, just like the rest of the colony's defenders. The Zalari never took prisoners unless they needed something. Diaz leaned forward. "What's security like?" Valka frowned. "Light. Maybe a dozen guards at any time, which makes no damn sense." "They're either underestimating their captives," Keller muttered, "or they think no one is coming for them." Rourke finished. The bridge fell silent. They weren't just about to prove the Zalari wrong. They were about to make them regret it. Rourke turned to his boarding team, Diaz, Valka, and 3 of the ship's best soldiers. "We go in fast and quiet. Get to the prisoners. Get them out. If we have an opportunity to cripple this ship, we take it." Valka smirked. "Oh, I can make an opportunity." Rourke nodded. "Then suit up." Minutes later, the boarding party stood in the Fury's deployment bay, clad in dark combat armor. Each carried a sleek, prototype pulse rifle, deadly, silent, and utterly unlike anything humanity had fielded before. "This is insane," Diaz muttered, double-checking his rifle. "We're infiltrating the flagship of an empire that wiped out entire fleets." Rourke grinned. "Let's make sure they regret that too." The Fury's ventral docking clamp latched onto the Zalari flagship's hull with a soft hiss. Valka worked quickly, overriding the airlock security. The hatch slid open silently, revealing the dimly lit corridors of the enemy warship. No alarms, no resistance. Too easy. Rourke motioned forward, and they moved. The Zalari ship was eerie in its design, dark, metallic corridors with shifting blue lights running through the walls, like veins pulsing with energy. The architecture was too smooth, too alien, built for a species that had never known true struggle. They moved in a tight formation, weapons raised. Every step felt like a countdown to hell. Valka accessed a nearby console, feeding them real-time schematics. "We're close. Containment block is just ahead." Rourke gave the signal, and they pressed forward. Then everything went wrong. A metallic shriek echoed down the corridor. The lights flashed red, and the ship came alive. A cold, artificial voice blared through unseen speakers, speaking in the Zalari tongue. "They know we're here!" Valka cursed. Rourke didn't hesitate. "Move! Now!" The corridor erupted with energy fire as Zalari soldiers poured in from side passages, their tall, skeletal frames moving with unnatural speed. Diaz was already firing, his pulse rifle tearing through the first wave. So much for light security. Rourke dropped one enemy, then another, but the Zalari didn't retreat. They weren't reacting with confusion. They were expecting this. His stomach twisted. "They set us up." From the far end of the hallway, heavy footfalls thundered toward them. A figure emerged, a Zalari clad in black armor, nearly 8 feet tall, glowing red eyes fixed on them like a predator locking onto prey. A Zalari warlord. Rourke barely had time to shout before the monster charged. And in that instant, he knew. This mission just became a fight for survival. The Zalari warlord moved like a nightmare given form. Fast, too fast for something that large. Its obsidian armor seemed to drink in the light, and its glowing red eyes locked onto Rourke with a predator's hunger. Rourke barely had time to react before the warlord was on him. He rolled just as a massive energy blade sliced through the air where his head had been, searing a deep scar into the metal wall behind him. The heat of it singed his armor as he hit the ground, scrambling for cover. Diaz and Valka opened fire, their pulse rifles tearing into the warlord's chest plate, but the rounds dispersed uselessly against its shields. The warlord didn't even flinch. Instead, it lunged. One of their soldiers, Patel, tried to evade, but the warlord caught him mid-movement, lifting him off the ground with one clawed hand. Patel screamed, thrashing as the Zalari's grip crushed his armor like paper. Rourke raised his rifle and fired a high-impact pulse blast straight into the warlord's visor. The force of it snapped its head back, forcing it to release Patel, who crumpled to the ground, coughing up blood. But the warlord didn't fall. Its head slowly turned back toward Rourke, red eyes burning brighter. "Oh, you've got to be kidding me," Diaz muttered. "Fall back," Rourke ordered. They moved fast, ducking behind cover as the warlord swung its blade again, slicing through the corridor floor like it was butter. Sparks erupted from the impact. The Zalari weren't just trying to kill them now. They were toying with them. Valka was already working on her data pad, fingers flying across the hollow screen. "Give me 30 seconds. I can overload the ship's gravity stabilizers." "We don't have 30 seconds," Diaz snapped, firing wildly at incoming Zalari troops who were now reinforcing the warlord. The air was filled with the shriek of alien weapons fire. Energy blasts sizzled past their heads, some scorching armor, others melting the walls into glowing slag. Patel wasn't moving. Rourke cursed under his breath. "Fine. Valka, do what you gotta do." He turned to Diaz. "Cover me." Then, before his brain could scream at him to not do this insane thing, he ran straight at the warlord. The towering Zalari saw him coming and swung again, its blade hissing through the air. Rourke dropped low, sliding beneath it as the blade carved a trench in the wall behind him. As he came up, he activated his wrist-mounted EMP charge and slammed it against the warlord's chest plate. There was a flash of blue energy, and the warlord staggered, its shields flickering violently. For the first time it looked off balance. Rourke grinned. "Diaz, light this bastard up." Diaz didn't hesitate. He emptied his rifle into the warlord's chest at full charge, the shots now tearing through armor, punching into the monster's body. Dark blood splattered against the walls. The warlord roared, stumbling back. Valka pressed a final key on her datapad. "Gravity spike, now!" Suddenly the corridor lurched. An invisible force slammed into everything. Zalari troops, debris, even Rourke and his team. The warlord, already weakened, was lifted off the ground and hurled down the corridor like a rag doll. It crashed into a bulkhead with a deafening crunch, the impact cracking its helmet visor. Then Silence. The warlord didn't get back up. Diaz exhaled, gripping his rifle. That was the dumbest thing you've ever done. Rourke wiped blood from his forehead. Yeah, but it worked. Valka grinned. Damn right it did. A distant alarm blared through the ship. The Zalari knew something was wrong now. Reinforcements would be swarming soon. Rourke turned toward the containment block. The prisoners. We get them out now. The war wasn't over yet, and neither was the fight. The corridor was a war zone. Scorch marks on the walls, the scent of melted metal thick in the air, and the body of the Zalari warlord sprawled like a broken titan against the bulkhead. But there was no time to celebrate. The alarm blaring through the ship meant one thing: reinforcements were coming. Rourke shoved a fresh power cell into his rifle. Move! We don't have long before they flood this place. Valka had already pulled up a holographic map of the ship. Containment block is 30 meters ahead. Security locks are engaged, but I can override them. Diaz reloaded his weapon. We just took down their prize fighter. They'll throw everything at us now. Let them try, Rourke growled. They pushed forward, stepping over fallen Zalari soldiers. The emergency lighting flickered red, casting jagged shadows along the sleek, alien walls. They reached the containment doors, thick, reinforced metal, built to hold prisoners indefinitely. The hollow panel next to it flashed in the Zalari language, warning of unauthorized access. Valka went to work, fingers flying across her datapad. Give me a minute. Diaz and the remaining soldier, Huang, took defensive positions, weapons trained on the corridors behind them. Rourke's gut was screaming at him. They were running out of time. Then a deep, metallic hiss. The containment door slid open. Inside, the sight hit Rourke like a fist. 20 people, humans, sat in the cramped cell, their faces hollow with exhaustion and terror. Some were in ragged uniforms, others in tattered civilian clothing. Their eyes, at first dull and lifeless, widened in shock when they saw Rourke's team. One man, a grizzled officer with blood dried on his temple, staggered to his feet. "Who the hell are you?" "Rescue," Rourke said. "Can you walk?" The officer nodded. "Most of us can." A woman in a torn scientist's jumpsuit stepped forward. "They were going to execute us," she whispered, voice shaking. "We heard them talking. The Dominion doesn't take prisoners unless—" A roaring explosion shook the ship. Diaz cursed. "That sounded like a hangar bay detonation." Rourke's pulse spiked. "They're destroying the ship?" "No," Valka said, horrified as she checked the ship's systems. "They're locking it down, cutting off escape routes." She looked at him. "They know we're here, Rourke. They're trying to box us in." Rourke gritted his teeth. "Then we punch a hole through them." He turned to the prisoners. "Stay behind us. Stay low. If you can fight, take weapons from the fallen. We're getting out of here." The grizzled officer knelt beside a dead Zalari, ripping a plasma rifle from its claws. His tired eyes burned with newfound fury. "I'd like to see these bastards try to stop us." They moved fast. Every step toward the extraction point felt like a race against death. The ship was awake now, fully mobilized against them. They reached an intersection, and then hell broke loose. A squad of Zalari warriors opened fire, energy rounds screaming through the air. "Down!" Rourke shouted, throwing himself behind a console as plasma bolts scorched past his head. The battle erupted, pulse rifles hammering, energy blasts lighting up the dark corridor. Prisoners who had taken weapons fired back with desperate rage, avenging fallen friends and families. Valka crouched beside Rourke, voice urgent. "This fight is only buying us time. We need an exit now." "Options?" Rourke barked. "Secondary docking bay," she said. "It's on the port side, but—" An inhuman screech cut her off. From the corridor ahead, a new shape emerged. Tall, spindly, and armored like living metal. Not just a warrior, An elite. The Zalari executioners had arrived. Rourke's blood ran cold. This just went from bad to worse. The Zalari executioner stood at the far end of the corridor, its skeletal frame wrapped in an armor that shimmered like liquid shadow. 7 feet tall, 4 arms, 2 wielding plasma blades, the other 2 clutching rifles fused into its forearms. Its red eyes locked onto Rourke's team like a predator sizing up its prey. And then it moved, faster than anything should move. The executioner blurred forward, its blades flashing in the dim light. "Scatter!" Rourke bellowed, diving sideways as a plasma bolt screamed past his head, melting a hole into the wall behind him. Diaz unleashed a full auto burst, but the executioner dodged mid-stride, its movements too perfect, too unnatural. In a flash, it was inside their defenses, too close for guns. It slashed left. One of the rescued prisoners didn't even have time to scream before the plasma blade carved through his torso. One down. It pivoted, deflecting a pulse round from another prisoner with a precise flick of its arm. The next second, it spun and impaled the shooter, lifting him off the ground before flinging him aside like trash. 2 down. Rourke's mind went into pure survival mode. He'd fought Zalari warriors before, but executioners? They weren't soldiers. They were walking death. "Valka, options!" Valka was already moving. "I can disable its shielding, but I need 10 seconds." They didn't have 10 seconds. The executioner lunged for Diaz next, its blade whistling toward his throat. Rourke tackled Diaz aside, the plasma blade missing by inches, singing his shoulder armor instead. The heat was unbearable, like standing next to a star. He ignored the pain, kept moving, kept fighting. Now would be a great time, Valka. Almost there! The executioner whirled toward Rourke now, its movements eerily fluid, its blades raised for the killing strike. Rourke barely had time to think, only time to act. He threw his rifle up to block. The plasma blade sliced clean through it like paper. The force of the impact sent him sprawling, hitting the ground hard, dazed. The executioner loomed over him now, blade raised, ready to end him. And then, "Got it!" Valka shouted. The executioner's shields collapsed in a burst of static energy. "Now!" Diaz, barely standing, emptied his rifle into the executioner's head. The alien staggered, its armor shattering under the concentrated fire. Rourke didn't hesitate. He grabbed his sidearm, a high-powered energy pistol, and aimed straight for its glowing red eyes. One shot. The executioner's skull exploded, its headless body toppling backward, twitching once before going still. Silence. Rourke pushed himself up, breathing hard, his armor scorched and battered. "Well," Diaz wheezed, "that sucked. Shut up and move!" Rourke growled. "We're not done yet." Valka was already at the terminal again, scanning their escape routes. "Secondary docking bay is still viable, but Zalari forces are regrouping. We won't get another clean shot." Rourke clenched his jaw. They had 11 survivors left now, beaten, exhausted, but still standing. The ship was closing in on them, and they had minutes before they were overwhelmed. They had one chance. "Then we don't go for the clean shot," Rourke said. "We make them choke on it." The ship was alive with the sound of war, blaring alarms, distant explosions, and the metallic clang of Zalari reinforcements closing in from all directions. Rourke's team ran, weaving through the sleek, alien corridors, their boots pounding against the smooth metal floor. The secondary docking bay was their only escape route, but it was on the other side of the ship, and the Zalari weren't about to let them leave without a fight. "Multiple life signs ahead," Valka warned, her eyes scanning the holomap. "We've got a Zalari squad blocking the next intersection." Rourke didn't break stride. "Then we break through." They burst into the open corridor and found themselves face to face with a full squad of Zalari soldiers, weapons already raised. The Zalari commander, taller and more heavily armored than the others, snarled something in their guttural tongue, probably a demand to surrender. Rourke answered with a bullet. His sidearm barked, the energy blast slamming into the commander's chest, sending the alien staggering backward. Then all hell erupted. The corridor lit up with plasma fire, the air turning thick with heat and energy blasts. Rourke and his team dove for cover, returning fire with everything they had. Diaz took out a Zalari with a precise headshot, the alien crumpling instantly. Valka, crouched behind a fallen console, typed furiously on a wrist-mounted datapad. "Buy me 20 seconds!" she shouted. "What the hell are you doing?" Rourke demanded, ducking as a plasma bolt sizzled past his head. "Overriding atmospheric controls," she said, grinning. "I'm about to vent this entire section into space." Rourke grinned right back. "Diaz, suppressing fire. Everyone else, hold on to something." Diaz let loose a wild spray of bullets, forcing the Zalari squad to duck for cover, just as Valka slammed her hand onto her datapad. The emergency airlocks disengaged. A massive rush of air ripped through the corridor, dragging the Zalari off their feet. The alien commander barely had time to snarl before he was sucked into the void, tumbling through space along with the rest of his squad. Rourke's team clung to whatever they could as the artificial gravity fought to compensate. Then, with a final hiss, the airlocks sealed shut again. Silence. Diaz exhaled. "That was ruthless." Valka smirked. "That was effective." Rourke pushed off the wall. "Move, we're almost there." The secondary docking bay loomed ahead, a vast hangar filled with sleek Zalari transports, their engines humming softly. And standing between them and escape, a dozen heavily armed Zalari troops. The second they spotted Rourke's team, the lead warrior let out a screeching battle cry. The Zalari charged. Rourke's team didn't hesitate. They fired everything they had, pulse rifles blazing, sending Zalari bodies crashing to the floor. But there were too many. Plasma fire rained down on them, forcing them to take cover behind crates and fallen enemies. Then, a new voice crackled in Rourke's earpiece. "This is Keller. I'm in position." Rourke grinned. "Then bring the rain." A split second later, the Starborn Fury's cannons roared. The entire docking bay shook as explosions ripped through the Zalari ranks, fire and debris raining down from the ceiling. The enemy squad was scattered, some vaporized instantly, others thrown by the shockwave. Through the smoke, the Starborn Fury descended, its landing ramp extending toward them. Their ride was here. "Go!" Rourke shouted. The team sprinted for the ship, dragging injured survivors with them. Plasma bolts sizzled past, but the Fury's cannons covered their retreat, cutting down the last of the Zalari resistance. Rourke was the last to board, spinning mid-stride to fire a final shot at a wounded Zalari warrior who still had his gun raised. The shot took him in the throat. The alien collapsed. Rourke turned and leaped onto the ramp as it sealed shut behind him. "We're in!" he shouted. "Get us out of here!" Keller punched the engines, and the Starborn Fury roared back into space. They were free, but the war was just beginning. The Starborn Fury burned through the void, its engines roaring as it pierced through the Zalari blockade. Explosions blossomed behind them, the remnants of the hangar bay still disintegrating as their escape sent shockwaves rippling through the enemy warship. But they weren't clear yet. "Multiple Zalari ships in pursuit!" Keller shouted from the cockpit. "They've got lock-ons, missile signatures incoming." Rourke gripped the back of Keller's chair. "Evasive maneuvers. Valka, get me countermeasures." "Already on it!" she snapped, fingers flying across the control panels. Outside, 3 sleek Zalari interceptors banked hard, their glowing engines burning blue as they zeroed in for the kill. The lead ship fired, and the Fury's systems shrieked as enemy missiles streaked toward them. "Deploying flares, now!" Valka hit the countermeasures, and a storm of glowing decoys burst from the Fury's hull, confusing the incoming missiles. 2 spiraled off course, but the third one kept coming. Diaz swore. "That one's got a tracking AI!" Rourke made a split-second decision. "Bring us around." Keller's hands blurred over the controls, and the Fury twisted violently, pulling a maneuver no standard warship could survive. The G-forces slammed into them, but the ship held. The missile overshot, its guidance system scrambling to adjust. And that was all the opening they needed. "Fire!" Rourke barked. Diaz didn't hesitate. He slammed the trigger, and the Fury's rear-mounted turrets came to life, spewing blazing hot plasma rounds into the missile. It detonated mid-air, a fiery explosion ripping through space behind them. But the Zalari interceptors were still on them, their weapons lighting up the darkness as they closed the gap. "Shields down to 46%. Valka warned. "We can't take sustained fire like this." Rourke's mind raced. They needed an edge. Then he saw it, a nearby asteroid field, dense and jagged, orbiting the shattered remains of a dead moon. "Keller, take us into that field." Keller hesitated. "That's suicide, the debris. Do it!" Rourke ordered. "We're dead if we stay in the open." With a grunt, Keller yanked the controls, and the Fury dove straight into the asteroid belt. Inside the field, everything turned to chaos. Massive chunks of rock tumbled through space, some the size of buildings, others no larger than fists. Keller weaved between them at terrifying speeds, the Fury's hull skimming dangerously close to destruction with each turn. Behind them, the Zalari weren't as lucky. One interceptor tried to follow too closely and clipped an asteroid, sending it into a deadly spiral. It slammed head-first into a floating rock, shattering into a fiery explosion. "One down!" Diaz whooped. But the other 2 Zalari ships were adapting. They shifted into aerial pursuit formations, their pilots expertly dodging between the debris, closing in again. "They're not backing off," Valka shouted. Rourke's jaw tightened. "Then let's end this." He pointed toward a massive, slowly rotating asteroid ahead of them, one riddled with deep, glowing fissures, its core unstable. "Valka, scan that rock. Tell me it's got what I think it has." She did a quick check, then grinned wickedly. "Oh, yeah, that thing's got trapped gas pockets from a planetary core collapse. One well-placed shot, and it'll go up like a bomb." Rourke's own grin was feral. "Diaz, load the railgun." Diaz's hands flew over the weapons console, bringing up the Fury's primary railgun, a weapon so powerful it was meant for taking down capital ships, not fighters. "This is overkill," Diaz muttered. "Damn right it is." Rourke said, "Fire!" The railgun roared, and a metallic slug the size of a small car ripped through the asteroid's core. For a split second, nothing happened. Then hell erupted. The asteroid detonated from the inside out, sending a shockwave of molten rock and fire exploding in all directions. The Zalari ships had no time to react. The first interceptor was engulfed instantly, torn apart in the inferno. The second tried to bank hard, but debris shredded through its hull, sending it into a death spiral before it slammed into another asteroid, bursting into flames. The starborn Fury shot out of the field, its hull singed but intact. Silence filled the bridge. Then Diaz exhaled. "Holy hell!" Keller let out a shaky laugh. "We're still alive?" Rourke stood, watching the burning remains of their pursuers through the viewport. "They thought we were just a prototype," he muttered. "Now they know better." Valka grinned. "They sure as hell do." Rourke turned toward the star map. The war wasn't over, not even close. But today they had sent a message, loud and clear. The starborn Fury wasn't just a ship anymore, it was the spark of humanity's revenge, and the galaxy would never be the same.